What would happen if the billionaire CEO of a massive corporation secretly disguised himself as a low-level worker in his own company? Most people ignored him. Some treated him poorly. But only one employee showed him true kindness, and that single act changed everything. The city skyline glowed like a crown of fire against the deepening dusk, glass towers catching the last light of day. From the very top floor of one of those towers, Richard Alcott leaned against his office window, staring down at the streets below where people hurried home, clutching briefcases, takeaway bags, or holding children's hands. To anyone who looked at him from the outside, Richard was a picture of success. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a man whose signature could move markets, and whose decisions determined the futures of thousands. But to Richard himself, all that glass, steel, and wealth sometimes felt like a wall between him and the truth. He had built his company from scratch, starting with nothing but determination, a second-hand laptop, and sleepless nights. Along the way, he had employed hundreds of people, then thousands. They called him visionary, tycoon, leader of men. Yet in recent years, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that something essential had been lost. The bigger the company grew, the more distance opened between him and the very workers who kept it alive. He rarely walked the production floors anymore. His managers filtered what he heard, presenting polished reports, not real voices. One evening, after another boardroom meeting filled with numbers but devoid of human warmth, Richard found himself restless. He thought of his late father, a mechanic who always said, "You know a man's character by how he treats someone who can't give him anything in return." Richard had wealth, but he wasn't sure he still had wisdom. That night, an idea took hold of him. He decided he would shed the mask of CEO for a while and step into the shoes of an ordinary worker in his own empire. The plan wasn't simple. He had his personal assistant buy cheap clothes, worn-out sneakers, and a second-hand lunchbox. He shaved his beard to stubble, traded his tailored suit for a faded hoodie, and left his designer watch locked in a drawer. For the first time in years, Richard caught the subway instead of being chauffeured in a sleek car. He blended into the crowd of tired workers, no longer Richard Alcott, CEO, but just Rick, a new hire in the company's shipping department. The next morning, he walked into the employee entrance of his own building, a place he had never stepped foot in before. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the smell of coffee mixed with machine oil clung to the air. Workers filed past him, some chatting, most silent, their faces worn from a grind. No one recognized him. To them, he was just another ordinary man looking for a paycheck. His first assignment was on the packaging line. The supervisor, a gruff man with a voice like gravel, barely glanced at him. "New guy? Great. Box those orders. Tape them up, stack them on the pallet. Don't slow us down." No introductions, no welcome, just orders. Richard swallowed his pride and nodded. He spent hours folding boxes, sealing them, stacking them until his back ached. Around him, co-workers moved with mechanical efficiency, barely speaking except for the occasional grunt or curse. At lunch break, he carried his second-hand lunchbox to the break room. The room buzzed with chatter, laughter from tight-knit groups, the scraping of chairs. He sat at a corner table alone, pulling out a simple sandwich. Eyes flicked toward him but quickly dismissed him. He was invisible here, just another nobody, except to one person. A young woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile walked past, balancing her tray. She paused, glanced at him, then turned back. "You're new, right? Mind if I sit?" Richard looked up, surprised. Most people avoided the new guy. Sure." She sat across from him, setting down a plastic container of leftovers. "I'm Sarah. Been here 3 years. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. What's your name?" "Rick," he answered, deliberately shortening it, hiding his true identity. Sarah nodded. "Well, Rick, welcome to the grind. It's not easy, but you get used to it. Just remember, tape gun's your best friend." She chuckled softly, and Richard found himself smiling too. For the rest of the day, he noticed how Sarah moved. She wasn't the fastest worker, nor the loudest, but she helped people when their stacks of boxes leaned too high. She covered shifts for mothers who needed to pick up their kids. She never complained when the supervisor barked orders. There was a quiet dignity about her, the kind his father would have respected. The following days tested Richard in ways he hadn't expected. His hands blistered from lifting heavy boxes. His back throbbed from bending and stacking. The break room chatter still excluded him, except for Sarah, who always made room at her table. She told him about her life. Her mother's illness, the younger brother she was putting through school, the second job she worked at night. Yet she never spoke with bitterness, only with determination. Meanwhile, Richard also noticed the other side of the workplace. Some employees ignored safety protocols, cutting corners to meet quotas. Supervisors dismissed concerns, focused only on numbers. A manager walked through once, clipboard in hand, his tone cold and impatient. He didn't greet anyone, didn't acknowledge the sweat dripping from their brows. Richard watched all this silently, feeling anger stir inside him. One afternoon, when the conveyor belt jammed and boxes began piling up, Richard instinctively jumped in, clearing the blockage with his hands. But instead of thanks, the supervisor scolded him. "Don't touch that without authorization. You want to get written up your first week." Richard bit back his words. He wanted to shout, "I own this company," but he didn't. He just nodded, swallowing humiliation. That night, lying in his small rented room, he thought about the irony. How the man who built the empire was being treated like a disposable cog in the machine. Through it all, only Sarah treated him like a person, not a number. One rainy evening, as they left together, she noticed his sneakers soaked through. Without hesitation, she handed him an umbrella. "I've got a spare at home. You'll need this more than me." That simple act pierced Richard's chest more than any quarterly report ever could. Day after day, the divide between how management treated workers and how workers treated each other became clearer. Richard began to understand the loneliness his employees must feel, the exhaustion, the quiet hope that anyone in power actually cared. He knew the test wasn't just about who respected him when he was Rick. It was about whether he himself still deserved the title of leader. And as the weeks stretched on, Richard realized that soon he would have to reveal the truth. But he wondered, when he did, how many would regret the way they had treated him. The following Monday, Richard walked into the packaging line again, the hum of machinery vibrating through the floor. He had begun to blend in, moving with the rhythm of the work, his muscles sore but adapting. Yet he couldn't stop noticing the cracks in the system, workers snapping at each other over quotas, supervisors barking without listening, exhaustion etched into faces that never reached the boardroom. Sarah remained the exception. She greeted everyone with a nod, offered quiet encouragement, and even shared her lunch with those who forgot theirs. She treated him, the supposed nobody, like he mattered, and Richard couldn't shake the thought. If kindness can survive here, maybe the company still has hope. That week, the regional manager, a man named Douglas, came down the floor for a performance check. He wore a sharp suit, polished shoes that gleamed under the harsh lights. Workers stiffened at his presence, nervous and silent. Douglas barely glanced at them, his eyes fixed on his clipboard as though the numbers there were more alive than the people in front of him. When he reached Richard, he frowned. "You, the new one, your pace is slower than average. Step it up. We don't hire slackers." Richard felt the sting of humiliation again, but before he could respond, Sarah spoke up. "He's doing fine. He helped clear the jam last shift when no one else moved. He's learning fast." Douglas shot her a glare. "No one asked you." He turned and walked off, muttering about inefficiency. Richard's jaw clenched, but Sarah simply shrugged. "Don't take it to heart. That's just how he is." That night, Richard sat awake in his rented room, the weight of what he had seen pressing down. If this was how management spoke to workers daily, then he had failed them as a leader. He had built walls of glass and steel so high, he had forgotten the ground beneath. His father's words echoed in his head like a warning bell. You know a man's character by how he treats someone who can't give him anything in return. The next morning, Richard made his decision. It was time to end the masquerade. He arrived at work early, still dressed in his worn hoodie and sneakers. As the shift began, he gathered his courage. The moment came during the mid-morning inspection, when Douglas strutted to the floor again, barking at workers. Richard stepped forward. "Douglas," he said firmly. The manager turned, eyes narrowing. "What is it, new guy?" Richard straightened his back, his voice steady. "My name isn't Rick. It's Richard Alcott." At first, silence blanketed the room. Then whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. Workers froze, jaws dropping. Douglas's face went pale. "I'm the CEO of this company," Richard continued, pulling his ID from his pocket, the real one with his photo and name. Gasps filled the air. "And I've spent the past 2 weeks working alongside all of you. I wanted to see this place as it truly is, not from behind glass walls or glossy reports. And what I've seen has broken my heart." He turned slowly, looking at every face, the tired eyes, the hunched shoulders, the hands calloused from endless labor. I saw supervisors treating people like machines. I saw managers who couldn't spare a single word of kindness. I saw dedication go unnoticed, hard work taken for granted. Douglas stammered, his voice trembling. "Yes, sir, I didn't know." Richard cut him off. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't know because you didn't care to know." The room was silent, except for the hum of the machines. Then Richard's gaze fell on Sarah. Her eyes were wide, her hand covering her mouth. "But I also saw something else," he said, his tone softening. "I saw one employee who treated a stranger with respect, who offered kindness when there was no reward, who reminded me what this company is supposed to stand for." He nodded toward Sarah. "And that was you." Every head turned to her. She flushed, shaking her head. I was just being decent." Richard smiled faintly. "Decency is the foundation of greatness. Without it, no empire lasts." Douglas tried again, his voice desperate. "Mr. Alcott, please, you know I was only pushing for efficiency. The numbers will never matter more than people," Richard said sharply. "This company exists because of them, not in spite of them. And from this day forward, things will change." He dismissed Douglas on the spot, the decision rippling through the room like a thunderclap. Workers exchanged stunned looks, whispers buzzing louder now. Richard then turned back to the staff. "I owe all of you more than apologies. I owe you respect, better conditions, and leaders who understand what it means to serve, not just command. Starting today, I will walk these floors regularly. I will listen, and I promise, never again will you be invisible in your own company." The workers broke into applause, hesitant at first, then swelling into a roar that shook the walls. Some clapped, some cheered, some simply cried with relief. Later that day, Richard called Sarah into his office, the real one, high above the skyline. She sat nervously in a chair, still in her simple work clothes, clutching her hands together. "I don't usually bring packaging line employees up here," Richard said, leaning forward. "But you're not just an employee. You reminded me of my father and of the kind of leader I once promised to be." Her eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't trying to stand out. I just believe people deserve kindness. And that's why you did stand out," Richard said, "because too few people remember that truth. I want you to join a new team, employee relations. You'll help us rebuild trust, improve conditions, and ensure voices are heard. It won't be easy, but I think you're exactly the kind of person we need." Sarah's lips parted in shock. "Me? But I don't have experience." "You have the only experience that matters," Richard said gently. "Heart." She lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you." Richard smiled. "No, thank you for treating a stranger like a human being when no one else did." In the months that followed, changes swept through the company. Break rooms were renovated, safety measures enforced, wages improved. Supervisors were retrained, managers replaced if they failed to treat workers with respect. Richard walked the floors weekly, sometimes in a suit, sometimes still in plain clothes. And always, Sarah was by his side, helping bridge the gap between the boardroom and the break room. The company's profits didn't fall as skeptics feared. They soared. Productivity rose, but more importantly, loyalty deepened. Workers felt seen, valued, human, And word spread across the industry of the CEO, who disguised himself as a worker to learn the truth. But for Richard, the greatest lesson wasn't the numbers or the headlines. It was in the memory of a rainy evening when a kind young woman handed a stranger an umbrella without expecting anything in return. Because in that moment, he realized leadership wasn't about power. It was about respect. And respect begins with how you treat the least, not the greatest. And that was a lesson he would never forget.